Hello, my name is Mollie Charge. I'm the admissions manager at New College of the Humanities. I'm sorry that I can't be with you guys in person today, but today we're going to be talking about how to write a winning personal statement. A few basics before we start. So you guys will be getting ready to submit your UCAS applications very soon, and UCAS is the service where everybody submits their applications to study at universities in the UK. You can apply for up to 5 universities, and you could select NCH as one of your choices, for example. When submitting your UCAS application, you'll include basics such as your contact details, an academic reference, so this will probably be a teacher from your school, perhaps the head of higher education, and it will be a reference in support of your application, as well as to mention your predicted grades or achieved grades if applicable. You'll also have an opportunity to include work opportunities. So for example, if you've completed any internships, or if you have a job, you can include this within your UCAS application, and it's kind of like a CV part of the application. The main part of the UCAS application is your personal statement. And this is your opportunity to talk about why you want to study your chosen course and why you would be the best applicant to receive the place at your chosen university. Often it's your only opportunity to showcase yourself to the admissions tutor. So for most universities that you apply for, it will never actually reach the academic faculty. In those cases, it would come to somebody like myself from the admissions team. And what we're looking for is students who are clearly passionate about their subject. I want to know why you, as a candidate, are better than candidate X, for example. Your personal statement's also helpful because it could help if you're a borderline candidate. Say, for example, you've applied for a course which is entry requirements of AAB, but you were predicted ABB at A-level. If you have a standout personal statement, this could actually help you in those cases, and you may be picked over a candidate who's an AAB applicant because you have a very strong personal statement. Often, your personal statement can also form the basis of an interview. So if you're applying for courses at Oxbridge, for example, or if you're applying for more arts-based subjects, it can help if you've got a good personal statement, and then when you go to the interview, your personal statement will form the basis of the conversation. Even further down the line, your personal statement can also be helpful if you don't quite get your results on results day. So again, say for example, your conditional offer was based on you achieving the grades of AAB, and you instead achieved ABB, but you had a personal statement that stood out. That's definitely something that could help you, and it could actually help you get that place even though you didn't quite meet the conditions of your offer. So what are admissions tutors looking for in your personal statement? The key thing you need to stress is your enthusiasm for your subject. Why you want to study that particular subject at university. You need to talk about things like extracurricular activities, but also supercurricular activities, and you mostly need to focus on the latter. And I'll go into a bit more detail about what supercurricular activities are and some examples in a little while. We need to learn about your contribution to your life at school. Say for example you're applying for a law programme and you are the law prefect at your school. That's definitely something that you should be mentioning in your personal statement. If you've been awarded any awards, or if you've taken part in any essay writing competitions, for example, that's something else that you can mention in your personal statement. And a key thing you want to focus on is wider reading. It's no good just to say that you want to study history because you've enjoyed studying at school, for example. We need to find out a little bit more about what kind of stuff you've done related to history outside your studies in the classroom. And again, I'll talk about how I can help you with that in a little while. But the key thing for your personal statement is to make sure that you have credible evidence for everything that you talk about in your personal statement. And we use a system called the ABC method, and I'll explain that in a while. Before you even begin to start writing your personal statement, there's a few basics to bear in mind. Number 1 is that you only have one personal statement. So although you can apply for up to 5 different choices, and that could be universities or courses or both, you can only write one personal statement. So it's important that you include stuff to do with every single course you're applying for within your personal statement. So before you even begin to start writing your personal statement, it's really important to think about which course is best for you. For example, if you're applying for different types of history courses, so say for example you're applying for modern history at one university and a more general history degree at another university, it's going to be quite easy for you to link up some cases within your personal statement. If, however, you're interested in studying, say, economics and midwifery, it's going to be a bit tricky to write a personal statement that incorporates both of those subjects. So before you even begin to start writing, make sure that your courses have some links in your personal statement. Your personal statement is a maximum of 4,000 characters or 47 lines, whichever comes first. Characters include letters, numbers, spaces, and punctuation. So it's important to bear this in mind when you are writing your UCAS personal statement, that one space equals one character. The third thing to remember is that every single personal statement is processed through the UCAS Detection Similarity Service for similarities to not only other personal statements that have been submitted in the past, but also with books and websites and articles. So it's very important that you make sure you do not plagiarise your personal statement in any way, shape or form. If you want to quote the words of another author, for example, make sure that you use the appropriate quotation marks and to cite the author that you have cited. Number 4, you are unable to check for spelling, punctuation and grammar within UCAS Apply, which is the system you'll be using to submit your application. This means that you should actually write your personal statement in a word processing package, for example, so then that way you can check your spelling, punctuation and grammar before you then copy it across to your UCAS Apply before hitting submit for your application. So now you're starting to think about how you want to begin writing your personal statement. And the key thing I would encourage you to think about is why you actually want to choose that course. What is it about that course that excites you? Say, for example, you've studied history at school and you're really interested in pursuing it further at university. Is there a particular area of history you'd like to pursue? What questions were asked at school that you weren't able to answer, but you think further research at university would help, for example? This also applies even if you're interested in studying a subject that you're unable to study at school. For example, philosophy is a subject that's not offered at all schools, but you might be interested in studying at university. In this case, you need to think about some examples of where you've been exposed to philosophy in your studies at school, but also to think about that wider reading you've done outside of the classroom, which has got you engaged in that subject. Here we have an example for economics. As you can see, the student here hasn't actually studied A-level economics, and instead they've studied other subjects, but they've talked about how their A-level studies in these subjects has actually inspired them to become interested in economics. So you can see here that it definitely doesn't put you at a disadvantage if you haven't studied a subject at school, but you are interested in studying at university. There are ways that you can look at your studies and apply them to the subject that you wish to study. Moving on to what we call the ABC method. Now, this is something that I encourage all of our students to use when writing their personal statement. The ABC method is the best way for you to not only address why you want to study the course and why you would be a good applicant, but it also gives you opportunity to link it back to your chosen course whenever you use this method. The A in the ABC method stands for activity. So this is for you to talk about an activity that you've done and how this will relate to your studies and why you're a good applicant. Here in the example, the student has participated in the annual ball committee. Now, this statement on its own doesn't tell me anything about the applicant and why they're interested in studying economics, for example. So this is why you need to apply the B and C in the method. B stands for benefit. So this is to talk about what actually you learned from doing the activity. So here, the student is talking about how they helped with time management, but also with teamwork. So already, the A with the B statement makes the student look a lot more attractive. They're not just using a throwaway statement, they're actually talking about why they're a good applicant and why they should be chosen over another. But it's always important to link it back to the course you wish to study. And this is where the C comes in. The C in the ABC method stands for course. This is where you always link your activity and benefit to the course that you wish to study. This always just ties it up nice and neatly, like you would just with an essay at school, in referring it always back to the question. In the example here, you can see that the student relates it back to why they think that they would be a good applicant at the university. Your C doesn't always need to relate back to the course itself, but it should relate to university as a whole and what you would bring to the university. Here's a more detailed example. The student mentions A, and they spend a lot of their time focusing on B, the benefit. In this specific example, the student gives a lot of detail and uses language which only a student who's really interested in that topic would mention. This alone makes them a lot more attractive as an applicant because they're giving specific examples rather than throwaway statements. So if possible, definitely mention specifics. And even if you are applying for a broader course, it doesn't matter if you give specifics. It always looks better if you can talk about something in a bit more detail than a lot of things in general. And with this specific example, you can see in the C here that they've related it back to their interest in the study of economics. As you can see, the C is very brief, it's only a few words long and uses minimal characters, but it just helps to tie up that statement nice and neatly. I would encourage you to use the ABC method for every single activity that you mention in your personal statement. Although you may see it as using up characters, it helps to tie up everything very nicely and to show that you're good at writing too. In terms of activities that you can mention in your personal statement, you need to focus mostly on what's called supercurricular activities. Now, you may have heard of extracurricular activities, which refers to non-academic activities, such as if you're part of a sports team or if you play a musical instrument, for example. But in your personal statement, you need to focus on supercurricular activities. These refer to activities which are academic in nature. They can be related to your curriculum, for example, but they actually go way beyond it. And this is what you need to spend the majority of your time discussing within the main body of your personal statement. Schools will offer different advice in terms of how much of a percentage you should focus on academic parts of your personal statement and non-academic parts. If you're applying for courses at Oxbridge or courses in medicine and dentistry, for example, you will need to focus much more on the academic than you would for other courses. Normally, the advice would be about 80% on academic content and 20% on non-academic content. For other courses, the advice is normally 70% to 30%. My advice, on the other hand, is to, where possible, do as much supercurricular as you possibly can, and where you can, actually relate your extracurricular to your academic too. Supercurricular activities include the following: wider reading. This is particularly important if you're looking to apply for a humanities subject. We don't want to see you talking about the books that you've read at school, but the books you've read outside the classroom. If you're interested in studying English literature, for example, what books have you studied outside of school that you've been particularly interested in? Is there a genre of literature that you're interested in? And if so, list some examples of the books that you have and apply that ABC method of what you learned from that book and the benefit it gave you and how it relates to the course you want to study. Wider reading also includes articles and newspapers, for example. So if you're subscribed to The Economist, say, then definitely mention this within your personal statement as an activity to support why you want to study economics. You can also mention if you've applied for any essay competitions. Many universities offer different essay competitions throughout the year, and I would definitely encourage you to apply for one if you have the time, because it definitely shows your interest in the subject, because you're doing an essay outside of your school time. It does not matter if you've applied for an essay competition at a university you do not intend to apply for. It is important that you mention the university that you did the essay competition for, and don't worry, universities won't hold it against you if you don't apply to them later. You can also mention podcasts that you've listened to, as well as taster lectures that you've attended. I would encourage you to apply and to attend as many taster lectures as you possibly can with universities. All universities will host taster lectures of some sort, whether they be virtual or in person. I'd encourage you to go to as many as you possibly can. And again, it doesn't matter if you don't apply for the university that you end up attending the taster lectures for. Extracurricular activities, on the other hand, can refer to things like you being part of a sports team, or maybe you're blue belt in taekwondo, or you're grade 8 in the flute, or you take part in a choir. Whilst these things are important to mention because it shows you as a well-rounded individual and not some robot who's obsessed with reading, which we know that not everybody is, it's important to leave these parts to the bottom part of the personal statement because they're not as important for why you would be the appropriate applicant for a course. That being said, there are some extracurricular activities which you can definitely make supercurricular. Say, for example, you're a prefect in a particular subject. This is something that you can mention as an extracurricular, which actually then becomes a supercurricular if it's related to the course that you wish to study. Other things which can be included in this include societies that you may be a part of. If your society is directly linked to the course you're applying for, you can make this extracurricular activity a supercurricular activity. So please do this where you possibly can. Another thing you can mention in your personal statement is work experience. I would encourage you to only mention work experience which is directly related to the course you wish to study in your personal statement. As mentioned earlier, there's a separate part in the UCAS application form where you can include other work experience. If you're applying for a law course, you shouldn't mention that you're a barista at a coffee shop, for example. That can be reserved for the CV part of the UCAS application. If, however, you've had work experience in a law firm, this is definitely something that you should mention in your personal statement because it's something that you can elaborate on a little bit further and how that's inspired you to want to study law at university. One of the best personal statements I ever read was actually from a student who wished to study PPE, and the only work experience that they had was from McDonald's. Now, going back to ABC method, that activity of working in McDonald's alone wouldn't have been very helpful for the personal statement. However, the student went into the B and C and talked about how their work experience at McDonald's had encouraged them to look at the economics behind the business itself. It had helped them with their people skills, which they wanted to gain more knowledge in for international relations. The student has made their work experience relevant to the subject that they wish to study. So if you can do this, please do and mention it in your personal statement, because that will help you to stand out to the admissions tutor. One thing which students always struggle with is how to actually start their personal statement. When starting a personal statement, please avoid the following. Here are the top 10 most commonly used UCAS opening sentences for a personal statement. As you can see, they're all a bit X Factor style in nature, and they also use a lot of the word I. Whilst this is your personal statement and you will be using the word I, please don't overuse it and definitely make sure that it's not the first word for your personal statement. Instead, when starting a personal statement, I would encourage you to actually use the word of the course you wish to apply for as the very first word of your UCAS personal statement. This way, when the admissions tutor receives your personal statement, they know exactly what you're applying for without even needing to read the rest of the personal statement. Now, this can be a little bit more tricky if you've applied for lots of different courses. So this is why I mentioned earlier that it's important for you to consider which course you want to study the most. Using the example of history, if you're applying for lots of different types of history courses, it is much simpler for you to use the word history as the opening line of your personal statement before then going on to details about more modern history, for example, if you've applied for modern history courses. Some students may apply for courses which, although are not the same, are closely related. I'm thinking, for example, of social sciences and also for humanities subjects which interrelate, such as history, politics and philosophy. In these cases, you need not use a word straight away in the personal statement, such as history if you've applied for politics at other courses, or PPH, for example. In these cases, you need to think of examples where you can relate all of your courses into one. When I wrote my personal statement myself, I was applying for history courses at some universities, whereas I was applying for history and politics at others, and history with philosophy at one. In this case, I had to find a way that I could relate all of those subjects together in my personal statement, bearing in mind I only have that one personal statement and I have to cover all those courses within that. How I avoided this problem was to talk about the French Revolution, which was something that I was really interested in. And here I spoke about specific examples in the French Revolution, a key area of French history, and how the politics of the time influenced the French Revolution and how that influenced the philosophy of the time and philosophical thinking, and talked about the Enlightenment. So here, in just talking about the French Revolution, I've actually covered all three of the subjects that I wish to apply for, and this is something that you should do if you're interested in applying for multidisciplinary courses. Again, one of the best personal statements I ever read was a student who'd applied to study law with us, but reading their personal statement, I could also see that they'd applied for art history at other institutions. And the reason I could tell this was because they spent a lot of time in their personal statement talking about art history and law, but they did it in such a way that they made it relatable and they connected the two together, so the student easily covered both subjects. The way they did so was to talk about Nazi art and the responsibility for who that art belongs to post-war. They spoke about specific examples of books that they'd read on this, as well as some documentaries that they'd watched related to the subject. Here you can see a student who's related two subjects which, on the surface, don't look like they belong too well together, but this student did very well to make sure that they did. If you're applying for multidisciplinary courses, make sure that you're giving examples that cover all of the subjects you've applied for and to connect them where possible. Moving on to the actual structure of your personal statement. As we've already discussed, you need to avoid the word I when opening your personal statement. But it's important to still have an introduction, just as you would with any essay that you'd be writing at school. Your introduction need only be a sentence or two long, but it is important to include. For your introduction, I'd encourage you to maybe mention the main reason why you want to study your course. Then you can move on to the main body of your personal statement itself, and this is where you apply your ABC method throughout. So make each paragraph focused on a particular activity, or maybe a particular topic if you're mentioning different topics, making sure you apply your ABC method throughout each paragraph. And make sure that you mention all of your academic interest paragraphs first and save any extracurricular ones which aren't related to your course towards the end. I would encourage you to have at least 3 paragraphs beside your introduction and conclusion. But if possible, I would go up to towards 5 or 6. This way it looks visually more appealing for the admissions tutor, as they can see that you can write in paragraph format. It also helps you to differentiate between different ideas and different topics on whatever you decide to include within your personal statement. To conclude your personal statement, please ensure that you have a conclusion. Similarly to the introduction, this need only be a couple of sentences long, but it should be that killer punchline at the end. So again, you could reiterate the main reason why you want to study your course. Or even better, perhaps you can talk about why you are the ideal candidate and what you would bring to the university. Why should you be chosen over candidate X to have a place on the course that you're most interested in studying? Before we end, I want to give you a few of Mollie's do's and don'ts when it comes to personal statements. Do use positive language. I know it can be quite tricky for students when writing their personal statements because they don't want to come across as big-headed, and definitely please try and avoid coming across as big-headed. You don't need to use Trump-esque language when writing your personal statement, but at the same time you need to be proud of your achievements, and you can do this in such a way which doesn't make you look like you're going overboard or that you're exaggerating any claims. Please use short and simple sentences. Bearing in mind your personal statement is only 47 lines long or 4,000 characters, you want to make sure that you have lots of sentences in there and not one long sentence which goes on for several lines. Where possible, do not use informal English. So for example, if you're writing don't, please change it to do not. Although it uses more characters, it does help and it comes across much easier to read. If English is not your first language, please don't rely on a translating processor. This is because it can sometimes not work out for you and it could get the words wrong. So I would encourage you instead to get somebody else to read over your personal statement. And this is true for all personal statements. It's really important that you get other people to have a look over it. You'll be spending so much time on your personal statement that you'll probably miss some basic errors. So it's good to get another pair of eyes over your personal statement. This can be your parent or guardian, your friends, and also your teachers. Particularly if English is not your first language, I would definitely encourage you to get somebody who speaks English as their native tongue to have a look over your personal statement. Your teachers will also be in a very good place to let you know if your personal statement is plagiarised, if it doesn't match the normal way that you write your essays at school. Please don't use inappropriate humour in your personal statement. I would advise not to use humour at all, if possible, because you don't want to take anything that may be deemed as racist or sexist, for example. So where possible, please do not use humour, or if you are, please be sensitive in the humour that you're using. Please don't over-exaggerate in your personal statement, and don't lie. As mentioned earlier, personal statements can form the basis of an interview. If you are invited for an interview, you will be questioned on your personal statement. So make sure that every activity you mention is true and you're prepared to answer questions about it. I actually had an example of a student who claimed to have read a book, which they didn't, and it turned out that their interviewer was the very person who wrote that book. As you can imagine, that interview didn't last very long and it didn't go very well. So it's really, really important that you're honest in your personal statement. Please don't mention things that aren't true. Although not directly related to your personal statement, when submitting your UCAS application, please make sure to use an appropriate email address. It doesn't look very good when one of the first things you receive when you receive the application is an inappropriate email address, such as cheesyfeet@gmail.com. Please keep it professional and stick to your first and last name and maybe a couple of letters or numbers if you have a very common name. Please also ensure that your email address is not your school email address. This is because once you've finished your exams, you'll probably be very excited to finish school and you won't be checking your school email address anymore. So please make sure that you have a personal email address ready to go. And if you need to create one, please do before you submit your UCAS personal statement. As already discussed, please don't overuse the word I. Even if it's your personal statement, using the word I too much doesn't look very good. And please make sure it is capitalised when you do mention the word I. In the example here, instead of saying I studied A-levels in, just change it up slightly to my A-level studies are, or my A-level studies have encouraged me to whatever. This way, you're not overusing the word I, but you're still talking in the first person, which I would encourage you to do for your personal statement. So now you've got all the tips of the trade and what you need to do for your personal statement, you need to start thinking about how you're actually going to begin writing it. I would encourage you to start with a mind map and to start thinking about your ideas for what you want to include in your personal statement. Think about all the activities you want to mention. And then once you have all your activities in place, start thinking about the benefits and the course itself, how it will relate to the course. Once you're ready to have a go, I would encourage you to start making a draft of your personal statement. Now please don't be worried if your first few drafts are well over 4,000 characters. This is completely normal, and it's actually much easier for you to cut down on your personal statement than it is to add things later. So don't be worried if you're over the 4,000 character limit in your first few drafts. It actually takes students a lot of drafts before they submit their final one. I remember when I wrote mine, I think it was draft 12 when I finally was happy with my personal statement. So please don't worry if it takes time. It's important to take the time on your personal statement for all the reasons we've already discussed. It is also important that you ask for the support and help with your personal statement when needed. Get other people to have a look over your personal statement. Please ask for their comments and for bits that you can improve. If your teachers are helping with your personal statements, for example, don't be worried if it comes back smothered in red pen. There's always more that you can do for progress. And when you're finally happy, make sure that you're happy with the rest of your UCAS application and hit submit. My final advice before I leave you today is don't leave it too late. If you're interested in studying courses at the University of Oxford or the University of Cambridge, or courses in medicine or dentistry, you will need to have your UCAS personal statement and entire application submitted by the 15th of October. For all other courses and all other institutions, you will need to have your UCAS application and personal statement sent and ready by the 15th of January. As a result, you've got plenty of time to start working on your personal statement, so I'd encourage you to get in there as early as possible so that you're ready to go and you're ready to submit for the deadline. It's been lovely speaking to you all today, and I'm so sorry again that I've not been able to be with you guys in person. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email the email address below, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions or another member of the admissions team. If you're interested in studying at New College of the Humanities and finding out more about the courses we offer, or to enter our essay competition, or to participate in taster lectures, please visit our website below.